Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And a couple cards using some of the brand new Pretty Pink Posh September release. This release is a fall themed release. As always, super cute. Just adorable. Wonderful. Love it. I will have a link to the release so you can check it all out because I only just touched on a portion of the new products and I mixed it with some oldie but goodie favorites as well. And while it's a fall release, and I do love fall color combos, like love, browns and reds and oranges and, all those colors, I went opposite to that. It's kind of fun to mix it up. So that's what I did. And did splatter and added some metallic and all of the things. Everything I used, as always, will be listed and linked as well in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It is what helps pay the bills and keep the channel going. My post, like my blog post for these cards, also linked below, as always, is part of a hop for this release, so definitely check out my blog post because I'll have links to many other fabulous makers, tons of inspiration, all the good things. And yeah, let's get into making these cards. I pulled out Neenah Desert Storm cardstock for the majority of these cards, and I started off with an A2 panel, and I'm using the new Pretty Pink Posh Mushrooms Layered Stencil. Of course, that was the first thing I had to use. It's so cute. And it would look super cute done like in red, or just fall colors in general. But like I said, I don't know. I was swiping, my brain stopped, swiping through my, Distress Oxide colors. And I was like, Spun Sugar. That's what we're going with. We're going with Spun Sugar. So I love Distress Oxides on top of craft cardstock. It's just because Distress Oxides have pigment in them, the pigments sit on top of the cardstock, so it'll show up on darker cardstocks. Even these lighter colors, with a few exceptions, one of them being antique linen. That one's a lot harder to show up. So I'm using my little Picket Fence Studios pint-sized paper pouncers to apply the ink. I especially like applying oxides with the pouncers versus using a brush. It's just, you get a smoother effect, and plus it's less work on the arms versus using a brush. But I used antique linen, and yeah, it doesn't show up very well, which I kind of had a feeling it wouldn't. So I'm mixing two colors. I used the antique linen first, and then I'm going over it with frayed burlap. So for that'll give me a decent color for the little stems. And then the final stencil does the little dot, details on these little mushrooms. And everything is stuck to one of my grip mats. So that's holding the cardstock in place, holds the stencil in place. We're good to go. So I pounced on all of the color, and I've mostly got my background because of course I'm not going to stop here. So put this in my splat box, and we're going to add splatter. And I'm using my little palette that I have my Distress watercolor pencils in. If you haven't seen that video, because yes, they're watercolor pencils, but I have them in a palette. But I did a video showing how I made this, and I will link to that in the end screen of this video if you want to check it out. I've done a whole bunch of videos using the Distress watercolor pencils and specifically this palette. But lately I have been using it as like my splatter palette, because then I've got just this wonderful array of colors to use for splatter, and I love it because the Distress watercolor pencils also have pigments in them, so they will show up on darker cardstocks. This first one though being Spun Sugar, you don't really see this splatter like in video, you can see it in real life, but I'm using that. I'm using some blue. I'm going to add some Rustic Wilderness to this because while these cards are mostly kind of pastel, the pop of Rustic Wilderness is again perfection. So I'm using my little fan brush. I had put water in the, colors I wanted to use. I've got my background in my splat box to kind of keep the splatter somewhat contained. And just going to town, adding all the fun little splattery bits. And trust me, we're not done. There will be more splatter coming. So after I did that, I set that aside. And then I die cut all my elements also from Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. The main one being the new mushroom shaker die set. You can make it into a shaker, or you can just make it into a little mushroom, which is what I did. But you can use the die that on the upper left there of my little grip mat, the die that cut that out, you could use that to cut out the frame to create the shaker from the main mushroom. I just left that off, and I'm just going to adhere it and do it like this. And then all of the little greenery bits and florals, those are from an older set. This is the Pretty Pink Posh Spring Foliage die set. I just pulled several little dies from that set and die cut just scraps of Desert Storm cardstock because I want to like cluster them around my big old mushroom. And I'm using, again, Oxide inks and my little pint-sized paper pouncers. So I use spun sugar, and then I'm using tumbled glass. And then I'm going to use that frayed burlap for the base of the mushroom. And I forgot to put it on here, but I also ended up doing the little flower centers. I also covered with the frayed burlap. And then finally, Rustic Wilderness, which, like I said, it just gives it a nice pop. Plus, I love Rustic Wilderness. And I especially love Rustic Wilderness on Desert Storm cardstock. It just, even though, again, there's pigments and it kind of sits more on top of the cardstock, it just tones it down just the slightest bit, and I loves it. So after I pounced all the color on, stuck the whole thing into my splat box, and I'm going to add more splatter. But this time we're going to add metallic splatter. And I pulled up my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors, and I am way outside the box of what I normally do. I didn't use gold this time. At least not the bright gold. I used the champagne gold. I decided to keep with the slightly pastel theme, and I went with this one because this is actually going to match the specialty cardstock I'm going to use too. So put a little bit of water in there, worked it up really, really well with my fan brush, and then heavily splattered all of these little die cuts. So they've got all their little shimmery bits on them. And then once I was kind of happy with all of the splatter on and like making sure all the pieces have a bit of splatter on them, pull this out, and then I'm going to put the background back in there and add some of the metallic splatter to that as well. And again, doesn't look like much on video on top of the like Desert Storm, but in real life, it just picks up the light. It's perfection. So I set everything aside. I had cleaned off my stencils. I've shown in different ways over the years, especially with like specifically the Pretty Pink Posh layering stencils in videos. A lot of times I would stencil the like card front, and then I would just move the stencils to the inside of the card, use the residual ink, etc. One thing though that I'm not a big fan of is using a lot of Oxide inks on the inside of my cards. Again, because the pigments sit on top, I find that when I go to like write over it, my pen will catch on the Oxide inks, and it kind of depends on the pen. A lot of gel pens usually aren't too bad, but yeah, if I can avoid using Oxide, like a heavy amount, I don't mind like a little bit of stenciling or just stamping an image with Oxide inks, things like that on the insides of my cards. I'll avoid it. And since I have the Distress inks I have the Distress inks and the Oxides in the same colors, I just went with the inks on the inside. So I use spun sugar and then antique linen, and then I'll use a bit of the frayed burlap with a light hand to stencil these little mushrooms on the inside of my card. And my card is a top folding A2 white note card, and I'd stuck it to my grip mat. I'd used my little post-it tape to score like right where the score line is so that I don't get any ink past the score line. And then I just did my blending real quick with blending brushes, just again light hand, especially with the frayed burlap, so because I don't want it to be super intense, because again you don't want it to be so distracting that you can't write over it and like not be able to read the writing. So I blended all those little mushrooms, and it was so cute. There's something so satisfying about stenciling and then lifting off the last stencil, and it's like, voila. So I set that aside, and then I got to assembling all the pieces, which for the most part is just sticking that piece to the mushroom. There's a little die that die cuts the dots. So I die cut that from this is Simon Says Stamps champagne matte cardstock, which I'm not even sure if I've ever used this before. I've had it with all my metallic cardstocks forever, and I don't think I've ever used it, which is just sad because it's really pretty. So I die cut also some of the like florals and greenery from it as well. So I assembled the little flower centers, and then the thanks word die is from the new Many Thanks shadow die set. I didn't use the many word, just the word thanks, and I die cut that from that same champagne matte cardstock. And the outline I die cut from vellum. I've adhered them together with some craft tacky glue. And then I had die cut another word from just the Desert Storm cardstock from a scrap of that. And I'm going to adhere this behind the vellum on the back. This is just going to enable me to apply adhesive behind this right on the cardstock so I don't have to trace behind the vellum, so that glue isn't going to show through. Plus it pops the vellum up just a smidge and it gives it that little extra bit of dimension. So after I did that, I've sped this up super fast in editing, but I just started assembling all the little greenery bits. And like I said, I die cut some of them also from that champagne cardstock. So I'm just kind of mixing and matching. And I'm just taping them behind this mushroom with washi tape, using a little bit of craft tacky glue to get everything adhered, making sure it's all going to fit on this card front. And then once I'm happy with everything, which just filled it right in, just stuck everything into place. And then once I was kind of happy with it, I'm going to adhere this to the card front with some thin foam squares, again, just to bump it up a tiny bit, give it a little bit of dimension. And I was still kind of fiddling with the layout of everything and where I'm going to place my sentiment, all that kind of stuff. I'm just winging it. So once I'm kind of happy with where I've got everything, adhere that final last like big flower and the little leaves, and then tucked the one like metallic flower there kind of behind the mushroom because I didn't want to cover up too much because otherwise you couldn't tell that it was a mushroom. I had so much going on here. So I'm going to flip this over, stick some thin foam squares on the back of it so that it'll just create just a smidge of dimension, but it also just kind of evens everything out because I did have so many layers of little die cuts and whatnot. Stuck that to the card, stuck a little bit of adhesive as well, just here and there, just to ensure everything. And then traced the back of that cardstock die cut on the sentiment with my glue, and then ended up sticking it on the bottom versus right across the mushroom. Because again, it was just kind of obscuring the fact that it was a cute little mushroom. So stuck that on the bottom, adhered the entire card front to my card base. And then I kept one more of the little florals and a couple of the leaves, and I'm going to just adhere those to the inside. I decided not to stamp any sentiments, just kind of left it as is. And that's almost going to finish off the first card. I'll add some little embellishments at the end. So I decided to repeat this with some other products in this release, and I'm doing pretty much the same thing. So I've got another piece of Desert Storm cardstock, and then this time I've got the Pretty Pink Posh Fall Words stencil. And this one I am pouncing on the Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. So I'm going to go across this entire stencil with this ink, remove the stencil. I've got all these fun little fall themed words, throw this into the splat box, repeat the process with the splatter. And because I had used this not long before I'd filmed the first card, I didn't need to add as much water. Things were still a little bit soft. And yeah, you just let this air dry with palettes like this, and any watercolor palette, because I have been asked that before. I just, after I've used it, let it sit out for a while with like the lid open. Everything dries, it's good to go. So, because the water just evaporates. So, did the same thing. I added like the spun sugar, and I added some frayed burlap splatter. Of course, the Rustic Wilderness, a little bit of the blue, like just went to town. Just went to town with all of it. Not worried about the center. I was kind of splattering it more around the perimeter of the background because the center is going to be covered up by all the die cuts anyway. So after I added all of the Distress Watercolor Pencil Splatter, all my die cuts, again from Desert Storm cardstock, and this time I'm using elements from the Big Fall Cupcake die set, and then greenery from that same Spring Foliage die set. So stuck them to my grip mat, and I'm using the same colors. So I used the Tumbled Glass, I used some spun sugar, I'm going to use the frayed burlap, and then I'm going to use the Rustic Wilderness. And if you look at the listing for this fall cupcake, you'll see like there's a bunch of other elements. Like you can literally make the cupcake topper look like a turkey. Love it. Or even a cooked turkey. It's just, I got a giggle out of that, honestly. I kept mine as just a basic cupcake, but I love the options. They're just silly and fun and just so good. And also Pretty Pink Posh has done many of these big cupcakes. It's another kind of series that she's been doing with different themes, and I've done other videos using other ones, and they're just fun. Like, because really, can you ever go wrong with cupcakes? Of course not. And it's always fun having add-ons and different styles and all those sorts of things. So once I was done adding the ink, of course, more of that champagne splatter. And again, remove that, stuck the background in there, added some champagne splatter to this as well. So we've got the little shiny shimmery bits that my inner magpie really loves. And then same thing with this one. Assembly was super simple. This floral piece is from the fall cupcake. It's actually technically meant to be a little, sunflower, but we do what we want. So adhered that and then assembled my icing and assembled my little cupcake here. And then once I've got that, the topper, or like the whatever you want to call it, of the cupcake, I die cut that from that matte champagne cardstock as well. And I did the same thing as with the previous card. I die cut some of the greenery and whatnot from that matte champagne cardstock. And I did the same thing with the thanks sentiment as I did on the first one, because I love that sentiment. I love all of Pretty Pink Posh sentiments. Her font choice is pretty consistent across most of the products, and I love this cursive font that most of the sentiment dies, as well as like the hot foil plates and whatnot, have. It's just one of my faves. So I did the same thing, stuck some thin foam squares on the back of my assembled cupcake, got that into place. And then I'm going to add my last little elements here, and was like tucking things in. I even forgot and did it afterwards. There was one more metallic piece that was like stuck to something. I don't even know, but I didn't want to get rid of it. So I ended up sticking it in the upper left of the card, like of the cluster, afterwards. Because yeah, it was sitting here after I was cleaning up, and I was like, oh, that's where that went. And then just snipped it, tucked it in with a little bit of glue, called it a day. So anyway, on the inside, I did the same thing as I did on the first card. I had cleaned off the stencil, and then I'm using the Tumbled glass, just regular distress ink, and a blending brush. Card base is another top folding A2 white note card, stuck to the grip mat, used the Post-it tape at the score line so I don't make a mess past the score line. Added the stencil and ink, and then I had another little piece of greenery and a little die cut floral, adhered those to the inside, and then adhered the card front to the card base with craft tacky glue. And then once I've got that adhered into place, for my little embellishments, this is another oldie but goodie set that I use frequently. It's the Pretty Pink Posh Valentine Hearts Clay Confetti, and the pink was perfect. It was a literal perfect match, which I love. I always say perfection's overrated, all the things, but I do get just such satisfaction, when random little things just match perfectly. Does it matter if they do? No, but it is satisfying when it does. So these little pink hearts, I was like, oh, meant to be. Love it. So stuck a few of those onto each of these cards and then adhered them into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue, and that finished them off. So I've got these very, very pastel, metallic fall cards. I had a blast making them. I hope you guys enjoyed. These were just a joy, And I love the different color combo. Although, like I said in the beginning, I do love me fall colors, like jewel tones and the browns and the reds and the oranges, and love. But this was also a lot of fun. So, like I mentioned in the intro, I will have links to all of the things in the description box below. I highly recommend checking out my blog post at the bare minimum and clicking around and hopping along and getting all the inspiration. All of that will be below. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate all of you, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in supporting me over on Patreon, the link to that is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!